Hey there everyone, it's Platonic D here filling in for the professor. Due to a user error on my part, we unfortunately do not have a video for session 3 of Curse of Strahd. We play these on my Twitch channel every other Sunday. The channel will be linked in the description below, so please feel free to come by and bug me to remember to record these videos if you want to see more. Keep in mind that I play Kellen in this game, so most of the information will be from our favorite Elephant Man's point of view. Without further ado, let me get into the Session 3 recap so you guys can keep up for when we get around to Session 4. We begin the session shortly after Veritan the Changeling's untimely demise and his unexpected revival into his new feathered form. The party takes a short rest, licking their wounds from their recent bout with the door mimic. Tarakis, Strahd, and Kellen sit at an old wooden long table to relax. Veritan rests at a small table in another room, and Gastroplex rummages around the room, looking at the discarded skin of Veritan's previous form. Kellen, a little flustered with the current events, called Veritan into the room with everyone and spoke to him about the dangers of running ahead. The conversation went okay, but at the very least a truce of sorts was formed for the time being. Upon the end of the conversation, the group looked around and noticed that Gastroplex had gone missing. After a quick search for the old wizard, they found that he had simply vanished, his tracks disappearing right where he had stood just moments before. The group decided to move on, hoping to find their lost party member, and moved past the spot where the door mimic had stood to the room that lay just beyond it. In this room appeared to be some sort of head cultist room, probably the master of the house, with lavish clothes, a large bed, and 2 paintings, one of the deceased man that Kellen had put into his crypt, and the other of a woman, presumably his wife. As Strahd reached down to search a footlocker at the end of the bed, a creature emerged from the portrait of the lady and attacked. Fortunately, our party was able to easily dispatch this foe. With a quick perusal of the room, the party grabbed some gear, including a set of thieves' tools, a box full of potions, and a cloak. With Gastroplex still in the wind, the group continued to search the floor. Journeying into a new room, our adventurers find themselves in a sick and twisted room of torment, pain, death, and worship. Bodies line the walls, chained up skeletons, arms raised above their heads. At the center of the back wall is a large wooden statue. Remembering back to the notes that we had found that had mentioned sacrifices and worship, we realized that this statue in front of us was the infamous Strahd holding an orb, this enigmatic, grandiose figure we had heard so much, yet so little about. While Strahd, Veritan, and Tarakis were looking over the statue, contemplating its meaning, Kellen saw something odd out of the corner of his eye. Shadows behaving oddly on the wall, moving in strange and unnatural ways. Taking a note from the situation with the mimic, Kellen poked the shadows with a spear, and the shadows began to quiver and shake and split, and soon the wall was filled with copies of the original. Concentrated fire upon one of the shadows that was sat right next to Tarakis proved fruitful, as the party was lucky, and this one seemed to be the focal point, and once it was defeated, the rest disappeared with it. With the room cleared, Tarakis pondered over setting flame to the statue of Strahd. Upon a second thought, though, he realized that with no ventilation, there would be nowhere for the smoke to go, and it would potentially kill most of the party. Grabbing the orb out of the statue, we continued our search of the same floor, but it yielded nothing new, so we decided to head down to the next floor. The first room on this new floor was an open room with strange items along the wall, including religious items to unknown gods, odd voodoo-like objects, and hag parts, among other odd items. The chanting here had grown louder and more clear, and the party's anticipation heightened in response. A pool of water in a hallway ended in a heavy metal barred door. Peeking through the bars showed a large room with a altar of sorts in the center. Raised stone platforms surrounded the room and on the walls, and water covered the floor. Kellen raised the portcullis with his large form and stepped to the other side so he could use the crank on the wall and keep it raised to allow all the others through. Veritan skirted the sides, climbing a short staircase to the outside platforms. Tarakis stood at the door, his missing leg keeping him from wandering too far. Strahd and Kellen both approached the dais in the center of the room, in opposite directions, Kellen taking the most direct route up. After Kellen stepped onto the raised podium, long-dead cultists appeared on the outside platforms, chanting, "He is ancient, he is the land." And once as he got closer to the altar. One must die. One must die. One must die. The party all came to the same conclusion of what the cultist wanted. They wanted a sacrifice, and the only thing around was poor Lancelot, the puppy. In defiance, Kellen threw his spear into one of the cultists in the corner, in part trying to protect Veritan, who seemed surrounded, but his weapon just phased through it, clanging uselessly on the floor. The chanting grew louder around them, and when Kellen had had enough, he stepped from the top of the dais and began to step down the stairs that he had taken up. With his first step, however, a large roar echoed through the cavernous room, and the dead that surrounded us stopped their chanting and began a new one. Lorgoth the Destroyer, we awaken thee! From a before-unseen nook on the far side of the room emerged a ball of fleshy hands and other body parts that began to lurch its way towards the center of the room. Strahd axed fast, using a thorn whip to pull the mass towards him, right next to Kellen. Unfortunately, the strange beast responded with a quick strike on Kellen, drawing the elephant person into its form. In response, Veritan lunged forward, his wings carrying him across the room, using his momentum to sink the silver sword deep into the beast, landing a heavy blow in the process. As Tarakis shot a bolt of fire, both doing a good amount of damage to the creature. Meanwhile, inside, Kellen sees a small shape, attached by tendrils of flesh. This shape, it seemed, was the child they had been looking for inside this awful home. Unleashing a cacophonous smite on the tendrils holding the baby, Kellen ripped through the flesh of the beast, slinging bits of it across the room. The child, safe for now, rests on the trunk of the large Loxodon. The good feelings that were brought with saving the child were quickly put aside, though, as the roof began to collapse on the group. Rushing out of the home, Veritan dodged several falling rocks, flying between them deftly. Kellen raised the portcullis that had fallen during the fight. Tarakis had used his magic to push the rest of us through a large room filled with water, and Strahd used his thorn whip to help us climb the spiral staircase that had led down, that has now turned into a slide of sorts. Once back up on the top floor, Veritan carried down Tarakis from the balcony, safely. But after he had done so, the balcony closed itself off with iron bars, keeping the newly formed Aarakocra from returning to help Strahd or Kellen. The two remaining decided to run down to the front door, forcing their way through some armor that had come to life. Finding the front door locked, the two heroes rammed into it with their bodies, but failed to open it. A quick glance at each other, and their resolve was set. They tried again, this time with more conviction, as the house around them collapsed. Success! They crashed through the door, leaving the old home to fall behind them. Kellen felt a sense of accomplishment as he saw the cursed place being eradicated from this world. But again, it was short-lived. The child he held in his trunk began to dissolve with the house, and a sense of dread washed over him. He should have taken the child to its tomb. He should have put it to rest. This is not over for the poor family of the house, and it was his fault for not realizing what to do. As the group came to terms with what had happened inside the house, they came across a crow sitting on a basket. A note inside welcomed us to Barovia, and it was signed by a single letter, S. Along with the note were some more potions and some food for us, along with a scroll of purify food and drink. After quickly eating, Kellen walked ahead, following the crow that had brought us the basket. And on the path, we saw a group of humanoid figures clad in mud with axes watching from the woods. A bit further on, the group saw a town and quickly hurried on towards it. It was now later in the afternoon when the group got into town, and they quickly began looking for lodging. They asked a few locals for a way to the closest inn or tavern, but got mixed results. Many were confused by the question, claiming that people in Barovia, which we had just learned was the name of the town, did not need an inn or a place to stay for just a single night. People in Barovia did not leave or need an inn, since they all stayed there. They were always there. The group pressed on and found themselves at the tavern, the Blood on the Vine. The tavern master was a man named Eric, with no personality, who answered everything very matter-of-factly. Turns out the tavern had no rooms to stay in. A group of 3 attractive women gossiping could be heard in the corner, but the party paid them no mind. With no room, the group decided to leave and visit the local store, Bildreth's Mercantile, to try and find themselves a couple of tents to stay in. Upon entering, the group met with Bildreth, the owner. He's a skinny, older man with gray and black slicked back hair. They looked around to try and find the camping gear, but found that everything in this place was significantly marked up, bordering on robbery. Strahd, finding out how expensive keeping a dog would be, offered Lancelot to Bildreth as a new owner. Kellen, who had not enjoyed his day so far, and still angry with the fact that he had failed the poor children in the House of Death they had only a few hours ago left, was livid at this blatant extortion, and began to try to persuade Bildreth into giving them a discount by showing off his sizable bulk. Bildreth didn't back down though, and instead called in his nephew, an extremely bulky and tall Periwinkle. Not wanting to cause any more trouble, Kellen backed off while the rest of the party tried to deal with the horrible dealer of goods. As Kellen and Strahd stepped out of the shop, Strahd heard an older lady calling for her Gertrude. Strahd offered his assistance to the lady, who he found out was named Mary, and she offered in return Gertrude's hand in marriage. Strahd declined, simply asking for a place to sleep, and Mary said that Gertrude, a 19-year-old brunette with blue eyes, had left with a group of adventurers about a week ago, or maybe a month. Years? She was very unclear about it. Strahd, not understanding normal human interactions and not realizing that Gertrude had left town, began to look around town for her. Around the same time, Veritan and Tarakas left Bildreth's shop. They were approached by a younger man with dark brown hair and an air of importance around him. The man introduced himself as Ismark, to which the women from the tavern who heard this responded, "The lesser," giggling. He claimed to be the rightful burgomaster, the leader of the village of Barovia since his father had passed. He came forward with a deal for the group. He asked them to escort him and his sister Irina to Wallachia. He offered a place to sleep and a somewhat sizable amount of gold for this quest, and Veritan and Tarakas agreed. The two of them found Kellen and Strahd looking around town, asking about for the missing girl to no avail, and told them of the agreement. The four traveled together to the house where they were directed to go by Ismark. Upon reaching the home, they found it to be run down, and regardless, they knocked on the door and were greeted by the sister, Irina. After explaining what was offered by the brother, the group was invited inside. As the group began to settle in, another knock was answered by Irina. An elven man of high stature stood there and began to speak to Irina. Kellen, still nearby the door, overheard the two of them arguing over who was the rightful ruler of the town and heard the name of Strahd come up. At one point, the elf looked at Kellen, and Kellen felt a strange feeling come over him, and a cacophony, a stream of screams could be heard emanating from his dark form. The elf leaves, obviously unhappy with the transpired conversation, and Irina, also unhappy about seeing the elf, turned back, offering dinner to her guests. The evening passes with the brother and sister explaining again what they needed, and that the mayor of Wallachia owes them a favor. The party agrees again to the trip and sleeps for the night, but not before Strahd and Tarakas do some tinkering throughout the night. The next morning, Tarakas comes down with a new leg, able to help him keep up with the rest of the group, and Strahd comes down with a new pet, a robotic dog. The brother and sister added on to their request that they needed to bury their father, the previous burgomaster, before they left, and asked the group to watch over them as they did. Kellen didn't agree to this new work as they added on, and decided to wait for them in the town, but everyone else had decided to join. Once there, Tarakas asked about the Dawnfather, a figure we had heard very little about, including in the home of the Durst that they had left the day before. The father there, Donovich, explained that the Dawnfather is the giver of light, though before he could go into any further detail, Irina cut him off, exclaiming that they didn't have time for that. The group finished their deed and began to leave the chapel, but heard as they were walking out a voice ringing through the hall. "Father, I'm hungry. I can smell them. Bring them to me." And Donovich began to weep openly, saying that he didn't know what to do. And Irina stormed out, saying again that they don't have time for all of this, and Ismark followed behind without a word. The 3 members of the party that had gone with them followed without asking any more questions about the possibly undead son to the chapel leader. While the rest of the group was helping bury the body of the previous Burgermeister, Kellen waited in the town square near Bildreth's shop. As he stood around, he was approached by Periwinkle and was offered an apology for Bildreth's behavior the day before. He also told Kellen of a package of meat in leather bundles that was supposed to have made it to the shop already. After finding out that it was on the way to their destination with the brother and sister Kolonovich, Kellen agreed, thinking maybe he could get a bit of a discount if he got on Bildreth's good side. The group met up at the center of town and left for Vallaki. And that's where we ended the session. We'll find out in the next session how this trip will pan out for our adventurers. Make sure to check us out while we play on my Twitch channel, and make sure to like and subscribe to Professor Phoenix. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for bearing with my mistake. Next time we'll make sure to have a proper video out for you.